After more than a year of shutdowns, the experience of live music, especially indoors, seems a distant memory. With venues transitioning back to in-person operations, the Boch Center is reaching back even farther with its Folk Roots Americana Hall of Fame, including a new collection of photos, many of them from the local archives amassed over the years by David Bieber. To tell us about the project are David Bieber himself and the Boch Center's president and CEO, Joe Spaulding. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris. We're thrilled to be here.
Great to see you, Chris.
Good. I want to start with Joe. I made this sound like an improvisation, as we emerge from the pandemic, but this has been percolating for quite a long time. And some viewers might be wondering, Folk Roots Americana, that sounds like something hatched somewhere else, but a lot of that did come to roost in Boston. So why is it appropriate to have this kind of an exhibit and almost like a museum here in the city?
Well, the truth is, and David can attest to this, is that Boston was really, became the heart of folk music outside of Greenwich Village. The Joan Baez's and the Bob Dylans and on and on and on were from this area, and folk was the primary venue along with jazz in those particular days. And folk Americana roots music is really, Chris, all music. And all music starts that way. From Leadbelly to Woody Guthrie to, Pete Seeger to all the way down to lots of new artists today, you all start with a thing called songwriting. And so we figured we should support that. And there's no place in the world that has a Hall of Fame like that. There's the Country Music Hall of Fame, there's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, there's the Blues Hall of Fame, but there's no folk Americana. So we decided to do it. And we launched into it a couple of years ago. And we've been building out the Wang Theatre to house this Hall of Fame. And the pandemic came, Chris, and we had to shut down. Now we're going to reopen.
And I think
David,
also that there's a very rich history here. I mean, you can go back to the 1950s and you can see what emerged out of what's now Passim, but back then was Club 47, where you had people like Joan Baez. She was a student at Boston University, playing, in the grassroots developmental stage, where Bob Dylan would, jump up on stage just to have bragging rights that he had played at Club 47, even if he hadn't been hired. He'd do it at an intermission. That there were publications and radio programs. Hillbilly at Harvard was a great tradition. Publications like Broadside were coming out of Boston. And I think that, you also had, relatively tangential, the Newport Folk Festival, which has been an enduring annual event. And you can see how acts emerge, developing acts become headliners. They can start at, for example, I remember in early 1970s, seeing John Prine on his first promotional tour playing at Passim. And sadly, before he passed away because of COVID, he played at the Wang, sold out 3,600 seats. So it's really a lifetime of connectivity.
And by the way, just to announce, we're about, so you're getting an exclusive here. Mr. Dylan has turned 80 years old, and he will be playing the Wang Theatre this fall.
I was looking back at these pictures. It's hard to believe he's 80. David, I looked at that photo of Dylan from your collection. Is it with the Joan Baez?
Yes.
That's amazing. I'm looking back at these things.
Well, that photo was from the Rolling Thunder Review from 1975, when Bob took an aggregate and ever-changing group of musicians and performance artists on the road. They played the Harvard Square Theater, and among the people who were involved were Joni Mitchell, Joan Baez, Roger McGuinn, Mick Ronson, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, all the people who were the sweet spot of what the Wang Project, the Hall of Fame, is all about. And when you do the math, it's hard to believe that was 46 years ago.
Joe, part of this exhibit includes a representation of people who are real heroes. This is going back even into the earlier part of the 20th century. They weren't just good musicians or performers. These are people who were real, they were real, I guess, social breakthrough individuals.
Yes, they were. And we are very fortunate to have an exhibit that we hope to have it as a permanent exhibit, which I haven't had a chance to tell David, but it looks like that's going to happen. And it's called the Cultural Heroes, and they are head bussed by a very famous sculptor out of Nashville, Tennessee. And they are of Woody Guthrie, Lead Belly, Bessie Smith, Billie Holiday, Josh White, Paul Reardon, and Marian Anderson. And very exciting. These things now are there. What we've discovered is that, isn't it interesting that these were, people who were advocating for social justice in the same way that we're doing it today that many years ago. And in fact, every single one of these artists, Chris, has had a United States postal stamp of their own. And so they were cultural heroes to this country going all the way back. And so we have that exhibit and we're supporting that. So yes, very excited to have it.
David, what about the other end of the spectrum? How even the new wave of people working this channel, it still sounds, I mean, I listened to Revolutionary Love by Ani DeFranco. I mean, this is not just old time nostalgia we're talking about.
No, absolutely not. It's interesting because that you mentioned Ani, because I am out here at my archives in the Norwood Space Center, and Ani's merch company is located here as well. She lives in New Orleans, but all the fulfillment for every record, every t-shirt, every pair of socks that has her logo or her name on it emanates from this location. But the poignancy and the impact and the importance is the statements that are made by current acts, and yet the historic acts are still very relevant. A local artist named Dave Tree actually created an image of and a statement saying Woody Guthrie was the first punk rocker. And it's a portrait of Woody, looking very punked out with, of course, his famous guitar and the slogan that says, "This guitar kills fascists."
Joe, one of the other things, and I picked up on this from looking at the photos, I might not have seen them at the Wang Theatre, or as it used to be known, I think Boston Music Hall, but I saw them somewhere. A lot of us our age, saying, oh, there's Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Jerry Garcia. I mean, what's it like when people come up and they see these photos, what they're going to feel?
Yeah, well, look, I came from that era, Chris. I mean, when I was 16 years old, I used to hang out at the music hall. In fact, I think I was like 18 when I met Ernie Bach for the first time. And we were both sleeping underneath the marquee of the music hall to stand in line and get a good seat. For some reason, he got the front row seat and I ended up in the balcony, and I've never forgotten that at this particular moment. But yeah, they were there. And most people don't realize, Chris, all the major acts all played the music hall. And many albums were actually recorded live. And the Rolling Thunder Revue that Chuck talked about also played the Wang Theatre. So these are very special moments. And as you already know, Chris, a concert at the Wang is very unusual. There's a real experience between the artist and the audience. And vice versa. So we've had a lot of that. We're going to have a lot more coming up. So we're really pleased to get back and reopen very soon.
David, what about your own experience? Because the Wang, as it's now known, it's much bigger than a club, but it's also much more intimate than a place like the old Boston Garden.
Correct. It is, and it is intimate. It's a 3,500 seat space that is intimate, and major artists really enjoy that. Sure, they could go play stadiums in many cases, and many of the artists we have do that, but they also want to play in a very special place, and the Wang Theatre is an iconic theater in this country. And I wanted to bring up, Chris, that when I first went to see Mr. Bieber at the Bieber Archives, I was very impressed that he could walk around over 2 million items in there. And whether he had rehearsed it or not, Chris, I do not know. But he went over to a bin of thousands upon thousands of records and pulled my record out of 1974. And I was like very impressed that he had that. And then he wandered to another space and he pulled out many of the artists that were on my label. And I said, okay, David, you got me convinced. Let's just do this project together.
Well, of course, I whipped out a Sharpie and had Joe sign that album as well, because people may not realize that Joe was actually a performer, a folk artist in the 1970s. And that was when I first met him. And we came full circle when I landed at Norwood Space Center about 4 years ago and was able to unpack all the content that I had been putting away, with the deferred pleasure, waiting to play in my own sandbox. And having Joe here 4 years ago, it was just exhilarating that, finally these items which I had been saving for decades were going to see the light of day and have a purpose and be shared with a public that really, I think, is going to be enchanted by the content that we're presenting.
Joe, finally, if people want to see the exhibit, and I know there are different ways they can do this, even some special organized tours, what's the best way for them to follow up and get some details?
Well, one, I think it's very apropos that we took advantage of this time of being dark to use the big LED as a mechanism to have a photo exhibit to show people what is actually in the archives that we have. And as you know, we did Ron Pennell, who's a Boston boy, one of the world's greatest rock and roll photographers. And a lot of his work, that was our first exhibit. And then we did Susan Wilson, who did all women artists that have performed on the Wang Theatre stage. And we were supporting Women's International Day and Month. And now we're doing Far Off. And we don't wanted to do Far Off now with David because the archives are now open. You can arrange to have a tour. Pretty soon we're going back to in-person tours, and you go to bochcenter.org and press on tours, and you can make your reservation and come and go through it. And we are now doing, 20, 25 tours a week at this particular moment and gaining speed. So we're very excited to have both going on.
I'd like to thank you both very much for sharing the preview.
Our pleasure, Chris.
No, thank you. And I hope that you'll come and visit the beauty of the canvas that the Wang is, and bring your friends.
Visit and revisit. Thank you very much, Lord of the Archives, David Bieber, and Joe Spaulding from the Boch Center.